I could feel it in my knees before I felt it in my hands, the cold front moving in, the kind that used to mean snow back when I still had a porch to watch it from. My son called it just a rough patch. My daughter-in-law called it temporary. What it actually was two men in work boots carrying my recliner out to the curb while I stood in the driveway holding a garbage bag full of my own clothes. "Dad, we need the space," Marcus said, not quite looking at me. "Lauren's mother is moving in next week. It's better this way for everyone. I want you to know I have never in my life been a burden to anybody. 41 years I worked the line at a die-casting plant outside Toledo. Never missed a shift I wasn't flat on my back for. Put my son through state on overtime pay and a second job hauling scrap on weekends. And there I was, 71 years old, standing in the November wind, while my own boy folded $400 into my hand like I was a stranger he felt sorry for at a bus stop. "There's a Motel 6 on Route 20, he said. "I already checked. They've got a room." I looked past him at the house. My late wife Dorothy's wind chimes were still hanging by the back door, the ones I'd bought her for our 30th anniversary, the ones I'd carried over myself when I moved in 14 months earlier, after the cancer took her and the silence in our own house got too big to sit inside of. Lauren stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, and behind her, just visible in the hallway light, my grandson Eli watched with his backpack still on, like he'd just gotten home from school in time to see his grandfather put out with the trash. I have never in my life needed anybody's pity. I did not ask for it that night either. What I did was fold the $400 into my coat pocket, pick up the one suitcase they'd let me pack, and walk to the end of the driveway to wait for a car. I thought that was the worst night of my life. I was wrong, because 6 hours later, before the sun even came up, a man I had never met called my phone and told me something that would turn everything I thought I understood about my life completely inside out. "I want to thank you for being here with me tonight, for treating me like family, the way you always do. If you're driving home from a late shift, or you've got the kids down, and the house is finally quiet, or you're just sitting up because sleep won't come easy tonight, I'm glad it's you on the other end of this. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, will you? I like knowing who's out there with me. And I should say some details in this story have been changed or invented for the sake of the telling, but the truth underneath it is real, and it belongs to more of us than you'd think. My name is Harold Voss. I grew up 40 minutes from where I'm sitting right now, in a town called Willowmere, Ohio, population 6,000, and shrinking every year the plant's closed. I married Dorothy Ann Reyes in 1979, in a church that isn't there anymore, torn down for a Dollar General sometime in the 90s. We had one son, Marcus, born in 1983. The year the plant put me on the night shift, and I didn't see daylight for 6 months, except on Sundays. Dorothy passed in February of last year. Pancreatic cancer, 4 months from diagnosis to the funeral, fast the way the doctors said it would be, but not fast enough that I didn't watch every day of it happen to her. After the funeral, I sat in our house, the house we'd bought in 1985, paid off in 2011. A modest 3-bedroom on Birchwood Lane with a garage I'd built myself out of salvaged lumber, and I could not make myself eat breakfast at our kitchen table alone. Every chair had her in it. Every window had her standing at it with a coffee cup. Marcus called that spring, told me he and Lauren had talked it over and I shouldn't be rattling around that big house by myself, that they had a finished basement with its own bathroom, that Eli, he was 11 then, kept asking when Grandpa Harold was going to come stay with them. He made it sound like a gift I'd be foolish to turn down. I sold the house in June. I want you to understand what that meant. Not just the money, though there was money. The mortgage had been paid off for over a decade, and the market in that part of Ohio had come up some, but the house itself, the garage I'd built, the maple tree Dorothy planted the week Marcus was born, grown thick enough by then that Eli could climb it. I signed the papers at a title company with a man in a bow tie I'd never see again, and I drove to Marcus and Lauren's with everything I owned in a U-Haul trailer, and the number from that sale sitting in a savings account like a stone in my stomach. The first 2 months were fine. Better than fine. Eli wanted me at his baseball games, wanted me to show him how to change the oil in Lauren's Honda, wanted bedtime stories even though he was going into 7th grade and too old for them, which we both pretended not to notice. Lauren made a big Sunday dinner every week and asked me real questions about Dorothy, about the plant, about my life, before I was just somebody's father-in-law living in a basement. By September it had changed. I could feel it changing the way you feel weather changing in your joints before the sky admits it. Lauren stopped asking questions and started asking favors. Could I pick Eli up from practice? Could I be around during the day since I wasn't doing anything anyway? Could I chip in for groceries since I was saving so much not having a mortgage? Marcus started coming home late from the dealership where he sold cars, and some nights I'd hear him and Lauren talking low in the kitchen after they thought I was asleep in the basement, and I'd catch pieces of it drifting down through the floor vents. Money, my name, a number. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing, so for a long time I told myself I wasn't hearing it right. By October, Eli's friend Tyler had started sleeping over on weekends, and the basement, my basement, the one with its own bathroom I'd been promised, needed to become a hangout space for the boys sometimes, which meant sometimes I needed to not be down there, which meant some nights I sat in my truck in the driveway with the heat running because I had nowhere else in that house that felt like it was mine to occupy. Marcus called me old-fashioned when I said something about it. Lauren said I was being sensitive. By November, they weren't pretending anymore. Dad, we need the space. That's what Marcus said, in the driveway, in the cold, with two men from a moving company I hadn't hired, standing behind him holding my recliner like a piece of evidence. Lauren's mother needed somewhere to stay while her own house got new floors put in a project, I found out later, that took 11 days. I was put out on the curb for 11 days of somebody else's flooring. I do want to say, because it matters to how the rest of this goes, that Eli looked like he might cry. He didn't say anything. 12 years old and already learning that in that how you didn't say the thing you were thinking. I understood that better than I wanted to. There's a Motel 6 on Route 20, Marcus said again. Like repeating it would make it kinder. He held out the $400. I took it, because it was 31 degrees out, and I am not a proud enough fool to freeze to death making a point. Nobody in that driveway was going to remember by Christmas. You're going to think about this night for a long time, Marcus, I told him. Not shouting it, just saying it, the way you'd read a fact off a piece of paper. He didn't answer me. He just went back inside and shut the door, and I heard the deadbolt turn, and I stood there in the cold with a suitcase and a garbage bag and $400, 71 years old, completely and totally alone in a way I had not let myself be alone since Dorothy died. Because at least in that house, there had been the noise of other people, even when the noise was cruelty. I called a cab because I don't trust the apps on my phone the way the younger folks do. The driver was an older fellow himself, heavyset, a St. Christopher medal hanging off his mirror. He looked at my suitcase, looked at the house behind me with its porch light still burning, and didn't ask a single question I didn't want to answer. There's a Motel 6 on Route 20, I told him. Or wherever's cheap. I know a place, he said. Vera's. She rents rooms by the week over on Delmore, cheaper than the motel, and the woman actually feeds you. Vera Kowalczyk was somewhere past 70 herself, silver-haired, built like she'd spent a lifetime doing work that didn't get easier with age, which, as it turned out, she had 30 years as a nurse at the county hospital before she retired and started renting out the top floor of her house to men who needed somewhere to land. She looked me over on her porch step, soaked through my coat from a mist that had started up, holding a suitcase that had seen better decades, and she didn't ask me a single question either. Rooms at the top of the stairs, she said. Bathrooms shared, but you'll mostly have it to yourself this time of year. Coffee's on at 6. Yes, ma'am, I said. I could use some coffee. She made a sound in her throat that wasn't quite a laugh. And something about it, the plainness of it, the lack of any performance in it, was the first thing in 11 months that had felt like kindness without a price tag attached. The room was small, single bed, a dresser with a mirror gone cloudy at the edges, a radiator that ticked and knocked all night like it was working through something of its own. I sat on the edge of that bed and counted the $400 twice, like counting it again might change the total, and then I lay back and looked at a water stain on the ceiling shaped like nothing in particular, and let myself think, for the first time in a long time, honestly, about the last 14 months. I thought about my friend Delroy. Delroy Banks and I worked the same line at that plant for 19 years before he took an early buyout and moved south to be near his sister in Georgia. We'd stayed close the way men from that generation stay close, a phone call every few months, longer on birthdays, the kind of friendship that didn't need daily tending because the foundation of it had been poured 30 years earlier and set hard. Delroy had called me twice since Dorothy's funeral, both times saying the same thing. "Come on down here, Harold. I got a spare room and too much quiet in this house. No strings on it. Just come." I hadn't called him back either time. I had wanted, foolishly, stubbornly, to believe that my own family needed me more than an old friend's spare room did. My phone was face down on the dresser when it started buzzing. I almost let it go to voicemail. It was past 11, and nothing good calls a man at that hour. But it buzzed again immediately, back to back, the same unfamiliar number, an area code I recognized as local but a string of digits I didn't know, and there was something about the persistence of it that made me sit up and answer. "Mr. Voss?" A woman's voice, careful, professional. "My name is Renata Ashford. I'm an attorney here in town. I apologize deeply for calling so late. I've actually been trying to reach you for 3 days." My chest went tight in a way I couldn't explain yet. "What's this about?" "It concerns Delroy Banks." The room went very still. "What about Delroy?" She paused just long enough that I felt every second of it. "Mr. Voss, I think this is better discussed in person, if you're able to come by my office tomorrow." I did not sleep that night. I lay in Vera's spare room and stared at that water stain and turned the sound of Renata Ashford's voice over and over, the careful way she'd said Delroy's name, like she was carrying something heavy across a long room and didn't want to drop it in front of me over the phone. I was downstairs at Vera's kitchen table by 6, and she set coffee in front of me without asking, the way she seemed to do most things. "You look like a man with somewhere to be," she said. "Lawyer's office. This afternoon." She made that same throat sound again and cracked 2 eggs into a pan without offering, because by then she'd already learned I wasn't going to say no to breakfast, even if I said no to everything else. Renata Ashford's office was above a hardware store on Main Street, small but tidy, with a window unit rattling in the corner even though it was November. She was younger than her voice had suggested, maybe 45, dark suit, a handshake that told you she'd practiced it. "Mr. Voss, thank you for coming." She folded her hands on the desk. "I'll be direct with you, because I think that's kindest. Delroy Banks passed away on the 14th. His heart. It was quick. The doctors said he wouldn't have suffered. I don't remember exactly what happened in my body in that moment. I remember the window unit rattling. I remember thinking, absurdly, that I still had his voicemail from 6 weeks earlier saved on my phone, unheard past the first 10 seconds because I'd been too proud and too tired to call him back. "Mr. Voss," she said gently, "Delroy named you in his will, not as an afterthought, as the primary beneficiary of his estate." I asked her to repeat that, because I genuinely believed I had misheard. She didn't repeat it exactly. Instead, she opened a folder and started reading numbers, and the numbers did not make sense to me the way numbers usually make sense. 2 commercial properties in Marietta, Georgia, both fully leased. A managed investment portfolio Delroy had built quietly over 3 decades, the kind of thing a man doesn't talk about at the plant because it isn't anybody's business. A paid-off house. Total, after taxes and legal fees, conservatively, north of $18 million. "There's a letter," Renata said, and she slid an envelope across the desk with my name on it in Delroy's handwriting, the same handwriting I'd seen on birthday cards for 30 years. "He asked that I give this to you personally, and that I tell you he wanted you to open it somewhere quiet." I did not open it in that office. I carried it back to Vera's in my coat pocket like it might combust, and I sat on the edge of the bed in the small room with the ticking radiator, and I opened it the way you open something you understand you can only open once. "Harold, if you're reading this, I finally went before you did," which honestly tracks. You always were the more stubborn one about doctors. "I want to tell you something I should have said out loud 30 years ago and didn't, because men like us weren't raised to say things out loud." 1989. The ice storm. You remember it, of course you remember it. You were there. My car went off Route 9 into that ditch at 2 in the morning, and I was pinned against the wheel with my leg broke in 2 places and the temperature dropping, and not another car on that road for what felt like a lifetime. You were the one who saw my taillight in the ditch. You were the one who pulled over in that same storm, in a truck with bald tires, and got me out, and sat with me in the cold, holding your own coat over both of us until the ambulance found us 40 minutes later. You never told anybody at the plant. You never brought it up again, not once, not even when I tried to thank you. I have thought about that night more than you would believe, Harold. Every good thing that came after in my life, every year I got to watch my kids grow, every dollar I ever made, every quiet morning with coffee on my own porch, all of it happened because you stopped your truck on a road. Nobody else was driving that night. I built what I built because I got the years to build it, and I got those years because of you. This isn't charity, old friend. This is interest, finally paid, on a debt I've owed since 1989. Use it to be comfortable. Use it to be generous, if that's still in you, and I suspect it is. And Harold, don't let anybody make you feel small again for the rest of your life. You've earned better than small. Your friend always, Delroy. I sat on that bed a long time with the letter in my hands. I want to tell you honestly that the number didn't feel real to me. Not that night, and not for many nights after. What felt real was the ice storm, 37 years gone. A memory I had genuinely filed away as unremarkable a thing anybody would have done, a thing I had not once in 3 decades thought of as significant enough to mention to my own son. I did not tell Marcus right away. I want you to understand that. I sat with it. I stayed at Vera's another 11 days, ate her eggs, helped her fix a leaning fence post in her backyard, because my hands don't know how to sit still even when my heart is somewhere else entirely, and I let myself grieve Delroy properly, privately, before anybody else's math got involved in it. It was Vera, actually, who let it slip, not out of malice, out of small-town habit. She mentioned to a woman at her church that her boarder had come into some money from an old friend down in Georgia, and that woman's daughter worked at the same dealership as Marcus, and by the following Thursday my son called me for the first time in 11 days. Dad. His voice had a warmth in it I hadn't heard directed at me since maybe Eli was small. Dad. I've been thinking about you so much. I feel terrible about how things went. Lauren feels terrible too. Can we take you to dinner? Just the 3 of us? Talk things through? I agreed. Not because I was fooled, I want to be honest with you. I was not fooled. Not even a little, but because I wanted to see, with my own eyes, exactly how far this was going to go, and because some small, stubborn, hopeful part of me that I am not ashamed of still wanted to be wrong about my own son. Dinner was at a steakhouse out by the highway, the kind of place Marcus wouldn't have picked 11 days earlier. He ordered a bottle of wine. Lauren asked about my living situation with a face arranged into something meant to look like concern. 40 minutes in, over dessert I hadn't asked for, Marcus finally got to it. So how much did he actually leave you? Not how are you holding up? Not are you doing okay being alone right now? Dad, how much did he actually leave you? Delivered with a half-beat pause before it that told me the whole dinner had been built around that single sentence. I'm still working it out with the lawyer, I told him, which was true enough. Well, he said, too casual. If you need any help managing all that taxes, investments, whatever, I know a guy. Estate stuff gets complicated fast for somebody who's never dealt with it. I told him I'd be in touch, and I paid for my own dinner in cash before he could reach for his wallet, because I did not want to owe that man one more thing in my life, not even a plate of steak. Sandra called it thoughtful. Marcus called it generous. But what happened over the following month was neither. It was a campaign. And once I started watching for it, I could see every piece of it moving. Lauren started dropping by Vera's with casserole dishes I didn't recognize, brand new, purchased specifically for the occasion, carrying them up Vera's front steps with an expression rehearsed enough that even Vera, watching from the kitchen window, said afterward, "That one's got an agenda, Harold. I've seen that face before." Usually right before somebody asks a dying patient to sign something, Eli started calling me, which was the only part of it that hurt in a way I couldn't be cynical about, because that boy's loneliness was real even if his parents' motives weren't. I let myself have those calls. I never let them turn into anything more than a grandfather talking to his grandson. Then came the invitation to move back in the guest room. Fixed up nice, Marcus said, the way it should have been fixed up the first time. Then came Marcus, showing up at Vera's unannounced with a folder of paperwork from a guy at the dealership who does estate planning on the side. A durable power of attorney with no transaction limits and no notification requirements. Full authority over all my accounts, needing only my signature. I did not sign it. I told him I'd have my own attorney review it, and I watched something flicker behind his eyes that told me he had not expected that answer from the man he still thought of as his tired, grateful, grief-shrunk old father. Renata Ashford reviewed it inside of 10 minutes and looked up at me across her desk with an expression I can only describe as professionally alarmed. Mr. Voss, this document would give your son complete and irrevocable control over every asset you own, with no oversight and no ability for you to revoke it without his signature also being present. I need to ask you directly, has anyone been pressuring you to sign anything? Has anyone had unsupervised access to your food or drink? I told her no, at the time, because at the time it was true. It stopped being true 3 weeks later. Marcus and Lauren had by then convinced me to come to dinner at their house, as a family, twice a week. Eli's request, supposedly, though I noticed Eli never seemed to know these dinners were happening until I showed up. Lauren always made the tea herself now, a habit she'd never had before, steeping it in the kitchen out of my sight and bringing it to me at the table with a warmth in her voice that should have told me something the first time and definitely should have told me something the fourth. Twice, after drinking that tea, I woke the next morning at Vera's with a fog behind my eyes I did not recognize as my own, not the ordinary tiredness of a man my age, but something heavier, something that made the drive home feel like it had happened to somebody else. Vera noticed before I let myself admit it. "You're slurring by 9 o'clock some nights, Harold, and you don't drink," she said one morning, flat, not asking. "That's not you getting old. I nursed 40 years. I know what sedated looks like." I did not want to believe it. I want to be honest about that too. Some part of me fought Vera on it in my own head for days, because believing it meant admitting my son was capable of drugging his own father's tea, and there is a kind of grief in that realization that has nothing to do with money at all. I had the next cup tested. I told Lauren I'd spilled it and needed a fresh one. Poured what remained into a mason jar in my coat pocket instead of down the drain, and drove it myself to a licensed lab in Columbus the following morning, paying out of pocket, telling nobody but Renata what I was doing. The results came back 9 days later. Lorazepam, a sedative, present at a concentration the lab report described as consistent with repeated low-dose administration over a period of weeks, not a single accidental dose. While I was waiting on those results, Renata's office pulled something else, a filing at the county courthouse, dated the same week as the durable power of attorney, a guardianship petition filed by Marcus Voss, requesting the court declare his father, Harold Voss, incompetent to manage his own affairs, citing confusion, disorientation, and cognitive decline, consistent with early-stage dementia observed by family. They had been drugging me to manufacture the very symptoms they were using in court to try to take everything from me. I sat with that for a long time, longer than I sat with the money. Because the money, as strange and enormous as it was, had never once felt like it was mine in any way that mattered until that moment, until I understood exactly what somebody was willing to do to take it. I did not confront them right away. I want you to understand that this part took discipline, more discipline than the eviction in the rain had, because rage is easy and patience is not. I worked with Renata for 6 weeks. We built a file, the toxicology report, chain of custody documented and sealed, the guardianship petition, time-stamped against the casserole dishes and the invitations to dinner, proving the pattern. A forensic accountant Renata brought in confirmed the estate guy from the dealership held no active license with the state of Ohio's Financial Regulatory Board at all. The power of attorney had been drafted by a man with no legal standing to draft it, presumably because a licensed attorney would have refused to write something so one-sided. Eli's 12th birthday was in early December. Marcus and Lauren threw him a party, backyard, heated tent, because it was Ohio in December and they weren't foolish enough to make my earlier mistake of putting people outside in the cold without shelter. I was invited, of course. I had become, by then, an honored guest in a house that 11 months earlier had put me out with the trash. I brought a folder. I waited until the cake had been cut, until Eli had opened his gifts, until there were enough witnesses in that tent, Marcus's co-workers, Lauren's sister, a neighbor named Phyllis, who I'd later learn had already suspected something was wrong from the way Lauren talked about the money situation at book club. And then I stood up at the edge of that party and I asked everyone, quietly, to give me a few minutes. "I want to thank you all for having me," I said, "and I want to tell you a story, because I think Eli's old enough now to hear the true version of it, and I think the rest of you deserve to hear it too." I laid the documents on the picnic table one at a time. The toxicology report first, the concentration, and the date range, read aloud in the cold December air. Lauren's hands came up over her mouth. The guardianship petition next, the filing date circled in red, laid directly beside the calendar of family dinners that had started that same week, so everyone could see with their own eyes that the caretaking had begun the exact week the paperwork to seize control had been filed. The power of attorney third, with the accountant's letter confirming the man who drafted it, held no license to do so. Every word being said right now is being recorded. I told Marcus, and I touched my breast pocket once, the way you'd tap a fact you wanted a man to sit with. Renata Ashford already has copies of all of this. So does the county prosecutor's office, as of yesterday afternoon. Lauren made a sound that wasn't a word. Marcus's face went through something I won't try to describe with any satisfaction, because there wasn't satisfaction in it for me. Not really, just a heaviness, watching a grown man understand in real time that he'd been caught, and understanding at the same moment that the man he'd been caught by was the same father he'd shoved out into the cold 11 months earlier, believing that man would simply disappear. Dad. Lauren started, and I let her get exactly one word further before I stopped her. I'm not finished, I said, and I wasn't loud about it, and I didn't need to be. You drugged an old man's tea to build a court case that he was too confused to manage his own life. You filed papers accusing me of the very condition you were manufacturing. I want you both to sit with that a while before either of you says another word to me. I did not ask them for an apology that night, because I already understood it wouldn't have meant anything if I got it. What I did instead, once the county attorney's office had reviewed the file Renata and I built, was let the law do what the law is built to do. Marcus was charged. Lauren, separately, for her role in the tea. I will not pretend to you that watching my own son walk into a courtroom didn't cost me something. It did, and it still does some nights, if I'm honest with you, the way I promised I'd be at the start of this. But I did not build that file to punish him. I built it because a man cannot be allowed to drug his own father and call it love, and because Eli deserves to grow up understanding that difference clearly, even if it costs him the version of his parents he wished he still had. Eli lives with me now, some of the time a custody arrangement worked out carefully, with lawyers on every side of it, but real. He has his own room in the house. Delroy's money let me buy back on Birchwood Lane, 3 streets from where Dorothy and I raised Marcus, close enough that Eli can walk to school the way his father once did. He asks me sometimes about the ice storm, about Delroy, about what it means that a debt from 1,989 could still be getting paid off decades later, in a form nobody could have predicted. I tell him the same thing every time. I tell him that blood does not obligate loyalty, and loyalty does not require blood. That Vera Kowalczyk, who fed me eggs and told me the plain truth about my own son before I was ready to hear it, is more family to me now than some people who share my last name. I tell him that the people who show up when you have nothing to offer them are the ones worth building a life around, and the people who only appear once they hear a number are telling you something true about themselves. If you're brave enough to listen, I am not a bitter man. I don't want you to hear this and think that's what I've become. I believe, the way I've believed my whole life, that the right people find their way to you eventually, sometimes decades late, sometimes wearing the shape of an old friend's voicemail you were too proud to return. Delroy found his way back to me 37 years after a ditch on Route 9, and I intend to spend whatever years I've got left making sure that debt keeps traveling forward, not backward. If this reached something in you tonight, I'd like to know. Tell me in the comments whose loyalty in your own life surprised you, one way or the other. Share this with somebody who needs reminding tonight that it isn't too late to see people clearly. And thank you, truly, for staying with me until the end of this one. It means more than you'd guess, coming from an old man who spent a long time believing nobody was listening at all.